Thanks very much. As you said, I'm going to talk about this idea of the entrepreneurial ecosystem enabling organization. I'll give you more details in a moment about that, of course. And so first of all, let me just share a couple of words on myself. I am the CEO of Boundaryless. That is the company behind, I would say, the development and the socialization and the invention, I would say, of the platform design toolkit and other methodologies for organizational innovation, business model innovation, and more. Myself, I've been working in open source and collaborative business models for now more than almost 2 decades. And I've been working in software, hardware, organizing, so fairly a large spectrum of collaborative endeavors. Boundaryless has the mission of exploring the future of organizing and business model innovation, creating these free tools, delivering workshops, and trainings, and consulting to our community of adopters. In details, Boundaryless is famous, I would say, for this platform design toolkit that now is being used by more than 70,000 people all over the world and several institutions, big and small, and essentially helps organizations and teams to explore platform opportunities, design for them, validate their designs, and grow. So that's essentially what we do. We have a very interesting and active community of leaders and designers, entrepreneurs all over the world, and it's always a pleasure to welcome new members. And recently, and this is basically the topic of this conversation today, we added another branch, I would say, to our framework-based approach to discovering the future of organizing. And this is what we call the EEEO Toolkit. That stands for the Entrepreneurial Ecosystem Enabling Organization Toolkit, indeed. That essentially helps us to connect business model innovation with organizational development and transformations of existing institutions, big and small. And indeed, if you are interested, Boundaryless itself is in the process of transforming itself to embody this methodology of organizing. And we have also released this framework in open source, like everything else we do. So you can access this, you can download it, use it for free. It's available on our website. And it's the first steps we are making in this context, in this direction. So you will be surely interested. You can also check out the elements of the ongoing conversation that brought us here. We have been working with Higher Group. It's a fairly famous organization all over the world for their pioneering experimentation of new ways of organizing. I will tell you more in a moment. But you can check out, for example, the webinars that we have been organizing in the last year and a half, exploring these and other stories on our website, on our YouTube channel, sorry. Also, worth mentioning that we've been interviewing other pioneers, so like Michele Zanini, Martin Rees, Doug Kirkpatrick, and many others. You can also check out these conversations online. So first of all, I would like to start with a question for you, or actually two. One is, how entrepreneurial do you feel you are from 1 to 10? And let's start with this. So if you can vote with a number in the chat, that would be interesting to see. So I'll give you 10 seconds.
So Catherine is saying 5 to 6. I'm saying 8. Florence says 7. Vim says 7. Sandra says 8.5. Nuzar says 8. Ista says 5. Steven says 7.
So we are more or less there, like 6, 7, 7.5, something like that. And then now the question is, how entrepreneurial is your organization, your company, let's say, if you work at a company and not at an institution, but how entrepreneurial would judge your company, let's say.
Florence says 8. Wim said 9.
Wow.
Jose says 7. Steve says 7. Sander says 10. Catherine says it's 6. So I want to know where Sander works.
Right. Yeah, and indeed, I'm fairly surprised, that you deem your organization more entrepreneurial than you. That's a very good point. I was actually expecting the opposite. So, having said that, let's move into a bit of context to the conversation. So, first of all, I want to just talk about a very important concept on everything we're going to talk about today. That is this idea of unbundling and rebundling. So essentially, what we are seeing happening in the market at the moment is this process of transformation from the age of industrial organizing into the age of post-industrial organizing. So we are witnessing a transition between organizations as pipelines, essentially constraining means of production and labor somewhere that could be also not necessarily a physical place, but I would say a certain organizational structure, very bounded, and producing essentially mass market outputs. So something that is fairly replicable, that you can plan, and it fits basically a one-size-fits-all solution. Most of all, I would say for sure the 20th century was based on these premises. Then what we are seeing now is this evolution towards I would say an organization that works more like a network that connects, more like a hub that connects at the moment. So why it connects? It connects because you have racing potential at the edge. So the small are becoming more powerful, I would say. And you also have increasingly different expectations at the edge. So your customers expect personalization, niche experiences. So to make it happen, essentially, you move away from the idea of controlling production, and you move into this idea of enabling and facilitating interactions. The effect on the market is that you have pretty much these three roles you can play. One role is the role of the long tail niche player. So you can create products and solutions that are very specific, I would say, and you can consume, of course, specific solutions. And then on the bottom, you have the infrastructures that essentially allow us to recombine elements into new value propositions. And in the middle, you have this emerging class of businesses that everybody knows. We call it platforms, we call it aggregators, sometimes we call them marketplaces. But essentially, these are the organizations that connect demand and supply, that, as I say in the slide, they become, basically quoting John Hagel, let me say, they become trusted advisors for customers and become talent agents for providers, for creators. So to some extent, we are witnessing a transition from an age of different types of players, like technology providers or service providers, time sellers, and so on, into what I'm just said. Now, these three roles, you can play essentially these three roles on the market. To quote, I want to quote Rita McGrath because she's definitely much better than me in explaining what is happening. And essentially, as you see transaction cost plummeting, you're going to see much more network-shaped organizations like markets versus existing and traditional firms. In this process, you're going to need to reorganize in ways that are nearer to where this value is produced. So you need to look into how we organize to generate interactions, transactions, and community and experiences more than consumable products. And again, I'm going to quote another very important voice here, Mark Andreessen, when he says that we're witnessing essentially the internet going beyond its infancy phase. So what does Andreessen mean? If you look at what is happening now on the market, we are seeing a wave of marketplaces. Even with stretching definition, so sometimes we don't call it marketplaces, but at the end of the day, what we are seeing are firms that leverage on this plummeting transaction cost to become much more organizers, as I said, of interactions between suppliers and consumers, than actually controlling the whole industrial process. Sometimes in the process, they need to control a bit more. So as I said, it's a stretching definition. So for example, if you think about a company like, I don't know, Open Door, there is this US-based company that connects sellers and buyers for houses, but in the process takes over the investments sometimes to buy the house before putting it back into the market. So then basically reducing the friction in a very important way. What we are going to see is much more of this. It's much more of these kind of network-shaped companies, organizations that take over more of the experience, with the aim of generating a so-called step function into the experience. So something that is 10 times better than things that are available now. And indeed, we are seeing this model everywhere, not showing up everywhere. So we are maybe not used to marketplace patterns and platform patterns in healthcare, but we are now seeing them with companies like Incredible Health or Honor. But here there are some examples. But I could cite, for example, Freightos, that is a marketplace that is enabling a transformation in the context of long-range container shipping even. So all industries are going through this reorganization towards networks, towards an unbundled set of resources that get rebundled on demand. So basically, Sanjit Choudhary, that I recently had on my podcast, was very effective in explaining this, that as we move out from the age where it was important to control suppliers, essentially traditional efficiencies have been built around controlling supply chains. As we move into an age where controlling the demand is much more important, as you know, our ability to serve the demand becomes the differentiating factor. And essentially, we could expect that the rebundling of the organization will happen more near to the demand than the suppliers. So that's a kind of taking our organizational world and, basically taking it the other way around, because we have been used to organizing being much more about controlling your suppliers. The very theory of the firm that Ronald Coase developed earlier on in the 20th century was all about it. And now what we are witnessing is that the differentiating factor is about controlling demand and not suppliers. So what we can see, if you look at the market, is that this playbook of unbundling and rebundling pretty much works like that. Here you can see the example of Airbnb that took the existing rentals, short-term rentals experience, like as powered by hotels, and unbundled, for example, the inventory and niche innovation here should be seen as the need, for example, to renovate a certain house or certain rooms, and let that be owned by the ecosystem, let's say, and in the process, rebundle higher in the value chain and rebundle nearer to the customer. So, for example, rebundle discovery, matchmaking, customer acquisition and attraction into marketplaces. So this is just an example to say that most of the processes we are seeing here now in terms of how successful companies reorganize markets deal with this idea of unbundling the market and rebundling nearer to the customer. And to some extent, this process is also now coming back, because if you remember what I said before, when I said that there is a stretching definition of marketplaces, what we see is that these marketplaces and platforms are now progressively rebundling the lower part of the value chain in a way that is functional to generate more consistent experiences. So it could seem that to some extent we are now reindustrializing something that was deindustrialized. So that's pretty much the process. But at the basis of this process, there is a radical unbundling of the organization. And let me explain a bit more what do I mean with that. So first of all, so far we have been talking about what is happening outside, but you would be surprised that about the fact that what is happening inside the organization is not much different. So why that? Because to quote Lee Jean, we are witnessing the unbundling of the Fordist bundle. We are witnessing the unbundling of the traditional capabilities that we are used to think as connected with a corporate. So if you think about, for example, the capability to distribute, to acquire new competencies, to, I don't know, for example, admin your financial needs, benefits as well, or even marketing capabilities. All these things are now available on the market. You don't need a big organization for that. And what is the point here? The point is that the new emerging, I would say, context of value creation that is affirming itself in the market up today is the small entrepreneurial unit. It's no more the large corporation. It's a small team, because these small teams can leverage quite a lot of potential, and even a single individual now can really reach directly to its customers and can achieve quite a lot of impact by leveraging on these unbundled capabilities that are available on the market. And indeed, when I interviewed Martin Reeves, who is the director of the Boston Consulting Group Henderson Institute, he said something very clear. He said, you cannot think about a successful organization today as a monolith that interacts with platforms and ecosystems. That's not going to work. And indeed, we knew that. We knew that since the 60s. And I think we really need to be recognize Mel Conway's ability to predict this at the end of the 60s, which is, I think, impressive. When he said that an organization will continue to produce outcomes in the market that are just a replication of its organizational communication structure, the way it works, essentially. And we find resonance of these ideas even in some fascinating work from cybernetics, and Ross Ashby, the law of requisite variety, is good at explaining how, as we move into complexity, our organizations need to embrace complexity. They need to refuse this traditional idea of organization as a set of silos that interact with each other, but they need to embrace this idea to become complex as much as the market, at least. So we have been seeing some of these trends unfolding in organizational development since a while now. And, for example, here we have two crazy important companies, Apple and Amazon, that have completely different approaches. And for example, on one hand, we have Apple, that is this functional, traditional organization, very integrated, very editorial, very much led by top-down led, I would say. And on the other hand, we have these, incredibly divisional and entrepreneurial organizations such as Amazon, where now 10 years ago, Jeff Bezos, through his famous memo, imposed to the organization to work as a network, by essentially saying, you want to communicate with any other team, the team needs to be small. You want to communicate with any other team, if not through a programmatic interface. So you need to unbundle the organization. And what was the impact of this in Amazon? At Amazon, it was a crazy important impact. It allowed, for example, Amazon to treat the external players at par with internal players. It's crazy because if you think about how Amazon introduced things such as AWS or the marketplace, that was just because of that. Think about the marketplace, for example. Why, if you are, for example, a division inside Amazon looking after the marketplace, what is the difference on having a category managed by an internal player or managed by and provided by an external third party? There's no difference for the unit. And this is how you create what Ben Evans called the machine that makes the machine. So essentially, Amazon works like that. It's a giant that we know because 10 years ago has been radically unbundled, and competition has been poured inside the organization, and technical and organizational debt has been wiped out from inside the organization. So yes, a few days ago, well, actually yesterday, I launched a podcast with Simon Wortley that you may know, and he said something very interesting. He said, if you take Amazon now and you remove all the market success that they have, in 10, 15 years, they will be at the same place because they have a very strong set of principles. And this is, I think, something we need to understand very deeply. Similar to Amazon, there are other organizations. You can think about Burzorg, this crazy, important, and successful organization that has been essentially reinventing how you provide personal care in the Netherlands through groups of independent nurses that manage their teams very independently. We can talk about Morningstar and its structure based on CLUs that replace essentially jobs with this software-based system for engaging, negotiating commitments between single units. And as we will see in a moment, higher group. But essentially what I want to say is that this is not just about higher. This is a trend that is happening in the market since now more than 20 years. And it's an expression of a rising complexity in markets. So it's to some extent a way that our organizations are taking to transform in a way that they make them more resonant with what is happening in the market. And this is a trait of success for most of the organizations that do that. So let me accelerate a little bit because I'm taking too much time maybe. So first of all, I want to really quote this point from Dave Snowden when he said that the future of organizing is about contextually unique solutions that emerge and adapt based on a coherent whole. Why this is an important point? This is an important point because essentially coherence is emerging as an alternative of control in modern organizations. So we need to move away from organizations that are based on control, top down, and we need to embrace organizations that are based on coherence. So we need to look into organizational development as a way to enforce coherence in systems and not just top-down control. That doesn't work in a world that is in constant flux and change. Dave Snowden, in the conversation we had, he made this example, he made this metaphor. He said, it's like you have, instead of an external scaffolding, an exoskeleton in the organization that constrains the organizational transformation, you embrace an internal scaffolding, like an endoskeleton that allows the organization to move and grow much more easily instead of failing because of those constraints. So, in a few words, what is the EEEO, the Entrepreneurial Ecosystem Enabling Organization, and what is its relationship with Rendanheyi? Rendanheyi is the methodology, the organizational methodology that Higher Group, this Chinese company I was referring to, that is a very important, I would say, case that has been studied in the last 10 years across the globe. You will find tens of HBR articles on that. It's based on essentially a few elements, a few key elements. And this Higher itself is essentially famous because it started as a, I would say, as a rundown state-owned factory for washing machines and fridges and so on. And it was based on this founding story, where essentially the boss of the organization, Jiang Rumin, at the time was taking over the organization, noted that some of the products that the organization was making were defective, and took out all the employees of the organization in the space and asked them to take one hammer each and destroy all these defective products. From there, it started a full breadth transformation that brought the organization through several stages, and to become the protagonist of the IoT and white goods economy at the moment. Is the biggest player in the world at the moment, the most one of the most important brands in China, and it has been famous also because it has been buying, for example, GE appliances. That is a fairly famous historical US player. And essentially, Haier Group is based on this structure that has three main organizational artifacts. One is the micro-enterprise, which is, I would say, the basic and most important element of the organization. As I said, essentially, Haier is embracing fully this idea of unbundling the organization indeed into small entities, small units that are very much entrepreneurial, similar to Amazon and other organizations, but very radically. So these micro-enterprises all are based on small teams that interact with each other through contracts. And these contracts are called ecosystem micro-community contracts. So essentially, when there's a new scenario, user scenario coming in, these micro-enterprises coordinate each other through these dynamic contracting structures that allow them to prototype new user scenarios, new user facing value proposition very quickly. And they are supported through these internal platforms that provide services such as HR or finance or IT, and on the other hand, manage investments according to the priorities of the organization. So what are the principles, the key principles that this organization has been embracing? So it's been transforming, I would say, from monolithic functional organizational designs into micro-enterprises that are interconnected by coordinating structures and contracts, as I said. From top-down defined goals and salaries, they have been embracing a way to dynamically define value in an outside-in way. And essentially, they are famous because, for example, they say you need to become a user-paid. So either you work in touch directly with the customer and you're paid by the customer that buys your product, or if you are an internal micro-enterprise, you need to find your customers among the other micro-enterprises. So essentially, there is a trickle down inside the organization of user capabilities and preferences, and it's like the organization gets reshaped in a way that generates most of the user value. So without going very much into the details, but I want to just share with you how this works in a few details. So micro-enterprises, as I said, they are small teams. They own the profit and loss, and they essentially have three key rights, as you can see. The right to take decisions, the right to hire talent, and the right to distribute compensation according to their preferences. So the organization itself doesn't control the inside of the micro-enterprise. The micro-enterprise is fairly independent. The only big aspect, of course, is that of having a positive profit and loss. Secondly, the EMCs, so these dynamic contracts, are created across micro-enterprises in a way that allows the organization to, I would say, break potential silos that get created. So the point here is, if you create networks, if you create independent small units, of course, these units may end up in making their, I would say, working towards their own objectives. And so if you have these collective collective ecosystemic contracts, they will find ways to generate user scenarios or new products and services that require the contribution of all these elements, because these contracts essentially dictate how much you, as a micro-enterprise, how much you will reap of the benefits of a new product or service or user scenario that is brought to the market. So these are ways to organize these interdependent units in a way that is functional to creating user-driven innovations. And finally, I would say, and this is something I said already, finally, I would say that this company is famous also because it has been embracing this culture of ever-changing context. So, for example, when I was there in China a few years ago at the moment, Jiang Rumin, the CEO of this organization, the iconic CEO of this organization, said, you either change or you become a museum exhibit. So that's pretty much the culture that you can find in, I would say, in many Chinese organizations at the moment, but surely in higher as a pioneer of this way of thinking. So to close pretty much the talk, this short talk that I would say is just helps you to scratch the surface of what does it mean to transform organizations in an entrepreneurial way. I can say that what we are seeing is pretty much a convergence of these three key elements in modern organizing. One is, of course, the organization itself, the incentives that you create. But then you need to look at I would say, at the edges, at the connection, at the interdependence, interconnections between organizing, contracts, and technology. Why? Contracts are essentially new ways to reduce transaction costs in markets. And now, for example, we have emerging technologies such as the blockchain to provide us with smart contracting capabilities that can, for example, disburse the profits of a certain product sales across an organization in a fairly easy and programmatic way, and technology as well. Why technology? Because technology makes it possible for new ways of organizing. And if we don't understand that for our organizations, adopting technology as a central aspect to enable new ways of thinking and organizing, we're going to be left behind for sure. So this is, I would say, my suggestion for the future of organizing. Also look into contracting and technology as essential dimensions. Finally, and I'm going to just let me show you another couple of key slides. First, if you want to embrace this way of organizing, these are the questions that you need to ask. You need to start to ask questions around how entrepreneurial you want your organization to be. And this means you need to face a certain polarity, for example, between how do you take decisions in a centralized or distributed way, or how you distribute entrepreneurial risk in the organization. So, for example, we talk a lot about intrapreneurship, but if entrepreneurs don't really reap the benefits of the upsides of becoming an entrepreneur, this is not really an entrepreneurial context. So I think similarly to that, across these three dimensions, companies that want to embrace this new way of organizing, so to become more entrepreneurial, more ecosystemic, and more enabling towards innovations that come from the outside versus imagining that they can bring innovations from the inside out, they need to face those polarities, and they need to understand where they sit in this context, in this I would say set of polarities. So that's pretty much all. You can check the toolkit out on our website. It's available. It's open source like everything else we do. I just want to say that in April and October, we are teaching a masterclass with this organization where we also have management legend, I would say, Bill Fisher from MIT Sloan, that is a long time, I would say, collaborator of Jiang Rumin and Hayo Group that has been working with us in developing this framework. And finally, I want to talk quickly about something else you can find on our website. We just released a white paper on 20th of November that puts together the entrepreneurial organization with, for example, the emerging risk landscape we are seeing. You will be familiar with the unpredictability that we live as We just went through 1 year of pandemic, so I think now we really know what complexity means. And finally, there is a podcast that I run every 2 weeks where you can find, I think, lots of conversations that reconnect with those points. This is just a final slide with contacts. If you want to take a screenshot or just check out probably my LinkedIn profile is the best way to be in touch. So that's pretty much all I wanted to talk to you today. I've been a bit longer than expected, so I hope I didn't annoy you. So that's it.
It's been very interesting. Thank you, Simone. We have one question right now from Sander, and I would like to invite everyone who has questions to do it right now in the chat. Sander, would you like to ask it for yourself, or you want me to read it?
No, sure, I can do that. Thank you. Once again, Simone, thank you for sharing all this. It's pretty interesting, very captivating as well, I must say. The question I have is, given this new structure that they are exploiting, by which standards or measure should you look at the success that this company makes in the market, and are they successful? Question mark.
Well, yes, I actually, in the interest of time, I would say I skipped one slide that shows how successful Hire has been in the last few years. Yeah, I mean, as I said, it's the most successful white goods brand in the world, and I find it interesting that they have been acquiring several other players all over the world. So, for example, as I said, they bought GE appliances recently, well, actually 2 years ago, and that was a very low-performing player in the US, and now it's growing much more than the rest of the industry, and seems to be gaining again a leadership position in the market. And they do that as once they told me, not by helicoptering management, as they said. They don't do that. They just infuse these principles of autonomy, market-drivenness, and zero in bureaucracy. So I think this is a very interesting way to drive change inside acquired organization through principles, essentially. And yes, they are successful. Most of the other organizations that I mentioned, such as Burzorg or Amazon, I mean, that's obvious, or Zappos, that has a very similar organizational model. They're all normally successful companies. How do you measure success? It's a good question. And I think in general, as we embrace these ways of organizing, there are much less, I would say, controlled. You suddenly need to deal as an organization with this idea of creative entropy. So with this impossibility as a leadership of the organization to set the direction and leave it more to the organization itself to find new products and new services, for example, that emerge much more organically. So I guess that success at the moment is pretty much on the same metrics like other organizations have, so profitability or market traction, market size. But these organizations seem to acquire these leading positions in a fairly different way, in a much more organic, much less control. And just to close, when I had this possibility to interview Kevin Nolan, that is the CEO of GE Appliances, he told me, I don't make strategy. The American enterprises do that. And I think I find it very impressive as a way to lead an organization towards new objectives.
Yeah. Thank you for your question, Sander. Paul, do you want to ask a question?
Sure. Hi, Simone. Thank you for the talk.
Okay.
Flipping the script a little bit, a lot of the examples you described were corporates, and how corporates can either adapt or restructure their organizations to be more entrepreneurial. Now, on the flip side, if you're a startup and you have different products that and product lines, and you have you seen examples of successful startups adopting more of these the structures that you described, and grow from this from the onset versus trying to reorg into some those structures? Right.
I mean, to some extent, what I could say is that two things. First of all, these are very new ways of organizing, and so there are not many corporates organized this way, in the world. For sure, we have been researching this and applying this, and as I said, now, for example, nowadays, I'm into two big transition projects that are based on this idea. One is a customer of ours that is a large bank in Europe. And another one is our company. That is a very small, 10 people company. I was talking with Bill Fisher once, and Bill said, you can think about your company as a small company with two products, or as a platform with two micro-enterprises. And I think this is what we are doing. Of course, when you embrace it from the perspective of a startup, you don't have, for example, the problem of reducing bureaucracy, because you are not bureaucratic. Essentially, you have different needs, different priorities than a large organization would have. But in general, I think the model is works. It works in small, it works in large contexts. Also because if you think about other contexts where these models have been, or similar ones, I would say, have been adopted. For example, I can talk about Tencent Games that also works along the same lines with the micro-entrepreneurial units. I mean, they don't call it Rendanheyi, but it's very similar, no? Another company is Ping An, that is this Chinese financial player that has been moving from one company with one value proposition, insurance, into 36 entrepreneurial entities. So to some extent, they are existing companies, but they also are startups, because they generate their growth through startups. The only difference is that they are led by internal employees instead of external employees. And normally, these employees really reap the benefits of creating new micro-enterprises that can grow. And many of the micro-enterprises inside IO Group have been IPOing recently, and the entrepreneurs that created them had tremendous upsides. And Ping An is the same with, for example, the telemedicine services.
Thank you for your question, Paul. I want to ask you, Simone, when you say the entrepreneurs, they reap the results, so they get some kind of incentive, to do that. So what are we talking about? It's like, what it's like partnership, it's like revenues sharing, what is it?
Why? The archetype, the pattern that emerges is a pattern where when you create a new micro-enterprise, you are subject to a contract with your organization. And these contracts details very well how you're going to be getting access to the benefits. And normally, if you think about hire, for example, in the first phases, you're talking about ways to improve your salary. So to have, I would say, upsides to your salary, but at a certain objective that you reach, you will have access to optionality, for example, to acquire equity of this company. And at some points some gates, let's say, in the development of the micro-enterprise, they also have the possibility to invest directly their own funds into the organization. I think this is what we are seeing as a pattern, that to really have an entrepreneurial process of innovation, which is not theater, you need to have real skin in the game. And of course, this is not easy to apply, especially in European, for example, or US countries, because of regulations. And so I would say that the policy is one of the things that is slowing down innovation fairly importantly in Europe and the US. And unfortunately for us, I would say Europeans and Americans, as you know, we are competing on a global scale, and the way policy is made is going to be decisive into how much we can unlock our potential in organization. So I hope that our labor discussion will soon, I would say, include also this topic.
Thank you. Does anyone else has an additional question before we conclude? We want to have about 10 minutes before the next networking session. So I will ask the last question. So what would be, if somebody would ask you, I want to organize, my organization is hierarchical, is very strict, we have silos. How do we start? What's the first thing we need to do in order to go to that direction?
Well, especially if an organization is very top down, you need to have your top leadership, top management to embrace this idea, no? Because the entrenched structures of interest that normally slow down innovation in organizations are really strong on their own. If you don't have enough support, I would say, from the top, you're not going to have any possibility. And I think one thing that you would start to is also to maybe prototype as much as possible inside your context of control as a leader in an organization. Maybe there is something you can play with in terms of virtual, for example, incentive structures. Not everything needs to be officialized and formalized. One thing I think, one key message is let go alibis in how you organize your teams, how you organize your business units. Dare to do something new. Don't wait for if you have your space, use it. That's the point. And also maybe sensibilize your leadership teams about the fact that not doing this today means, I would say, making your organization irrelevant in a very short term, because things are changing fast and we are living through complexity. Organizations that don't adapt their organizational structures, they're going to suffer a lot and possibly lose market share and lose relevance.
Yeah. So it's been really inspiring. I want to thank you and thanks. Oh, there is another question from Catherine. Do you want to ask?
Simone, to get there where you wanted, especially what Adi asked, is Agile a first step to go into that direction?
I think so. I mean, especially if we take Agile as a set of principles,
right,
and not as something that we need to do so that we are good, so that's the point. But again, Agile is right, but not enough. Yeah. You need to really bust bureaucracy and to really, take this challenge seriously. So bureaucracy is going to kill organizations if we don't change them in a complex world. So we can be agile, but then if you are bureaucratically agile, that's not going to work.
Correct. Thank you.
Thanks, Catherine, for the question. And thanks, everyone. It's been a pleasure to have you all here. Thanks, Simone, for this enlightening talk. And Vimy says inspirational. Thank you. And we would like
I really encourage everybody to get in touch. I'm not sure I can join the session, the networking session, but I would really love to be in touch with you and follow up with conversations and explorations.
Yeah, and Catherine and Paul says thank you. So thank you to everyone here and have a great day. See ya.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.